Hi, everybody, welcome to our channel, The Scary Tales. Our scary and horror stories are designed to send chills down your spine. Enjoy the spine-tingling stories thrill. Here's your horror stories about Campfire story. The shadow in the woods. The campers had been laughing and telling jokes, completely unaware of the strange silence that had fallen over the forest. It wasn't until the crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs disturbed their fun that they realized they weren't alone. One by one, the noises grew closer, but the brave among them who ventured into the dark couldn't find anything, just an empty, still forest. That night, they huddled together in their tents, uneasy. As they drifted to sleep, one camper awoke to the sound of breathing coming from outside. When he peeked out, he saw a silhouette standing just at the edge of the campfire's glow, unmoving. In the morning, they discovered strange footprints around their tents, but no sign of the figure. The whistling man, the man, dressed in ragged clothes, appeared out of nowhere, his whistling echoing eerily through the campsite. He smiled kindly, and his weathered face was framed by long, tangled hair. They offered him food, and he declined, only asking for a sip of water before quickly darting off into the woods. The couple noticed a strange chill in the air after his departure, as if something wasn't quite right. Later, when they returned to town, they asked about him, only to be told the same thing. That man, he died in those woods years ago. Everyone said he still wanders there. The memory of his cold, knowing smile haunted them long after. The haunted campground family was excited for a weekend getaway in the isolated campsite, far from civilization. The first night, they felt an unsettling feeling in the air, like they were being watched. Around midnight, they heard footsteps circling their tent, slow, deliberate steps. Thinking it was just an animal, they didn't react, but the next day, they found strange markings on their tents, carved symbols they didn't recognize. When they went into town to learn more about the area, they discovered that the campground had been abandoned after a horrific massacre of campers years ago. Some said the spirits of the victims still roamed the area, never resting. For the ghostly hitchhiker had started to rain heavily as the friends drove down a dark, narrow road, surrounded by thick woods. They noticed a lone figure standing at the side of the road, drenched but still waving. The friends stopped and let him in. The man said very little, merely nodding when spoken to, and didn't even react when they joked about the storm. As they approached an old bridge, the man suddenly vanished, leaving only wet seats behind. When the friends stopped at a diner later and asked about the mysterious hitchhiker, the waitress went pale and told them the same thing everyone around there said. That man died in a car crash on that very bridge. Years ago. The woman in the mirror, teenager Mia, had brought a small handheld mirror on her camping trip with friends, thinking it would be fun to pass time. When she looked into it one night, she saw a woman standing behind her, dressed in white, her hair long and flowing. But when Mia turned around, there was nothing, just the darkness of the woods. The woman reappeared in the mirror several times throughout the night, each time growing closer to the glass. Mia tried to ignore it, but the eerie feeling of the woman's eyes watching her never left. The next morning, Mia discovered her reflection had changed. There was an unusual scratch on her face that hadn't been there before. The missing camper Jason was an experienced solo hiker, and when he ventured into the woods, no one thought much of it. But when he failed to return as planned, his friends and family became concerned. They organized a search party. After hours of combing the area, they found his abandoned tent, still set up and undisturbed, along with his gear, but there were no signs of Jason. As the search continued, one of the searchers found a folded piece of paper wedged under a rock near the edge of the forest. It read, in Jason's handwriting, "They found me. They're still here." No one could make sense of it, and the woods seemed to grow darker the longer they stayed. The beast of the forest. A group of hikers entered a dense, untamed forest that was known to be haunted by legends of a monstrous creature. The first night, they heard strange, guttural growls in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush. They brushed it off as the sounds of a bear, but as the night wore on, the noises grew closer, too close. They gathered their things in a panic when they noticed claw marks on the trees, some as high as 10 feet up. The group hurried back to the campsite, only to find their tent had been shredded. The creature had clearly been toying with them, and they barely escaped with their lives. Ate the voices on the wind late into the night. The campers began hearing soft, whispering voices carried by the wind. At first, they thought it was just the wind itself, but the voices grew louder and more distinct. They could hear their own names being called, as if someone knew exactly who they were. Some of the group members tried to investigate, but every time they ventured into the trees, the voices stopped. Terrified, they returned to camp, only to find their personal items rearranged. And more unnerving, the names on their IDs, wallets, phones, and backpacks had been altered to something unrecognizable. 9. The campfire story that came to life around the campfire. The group of friends told each other spooky stories, joking about how the creatures in the woods might hear them and come to life. They laughed it off, but when the story of a shape-shifting beast that mimicked human voices was told, the air turned cold. Just as the last person finished their tale, a distant, panic cry for help echoed through the trees, unmistakably sounding like one of their own. They grabbed their flashlights and ran into the woods, but they found nothing but silence. It was then that they realized the voice had been calling from every direction. Something or someone was mimicking them, and it wasn't far. 10. The stalker in the woods. Lauren and Mark had set up camp in a quiet, isolated part of the forest. The first night was peaceful, but the next evening, they started noticing strange occurrences. Their food disappeared from a campsite, but no one had touched it. Their backpacks were moved, and every time they turned around, something fell off. One night, Mark went to fetch some water from the nearby creek, but he never returned. Lauren, panicked, searched for him, but found only his tracks leading into the forest. As she followed the trail, she found that it led to a small, abandoned cabin hidden deep in the trees, where Mark's belongings were scattered, but there was no sign of him. Only the faintest sound of someone, watching her from the shadows. The end.